week ago. This man took it upon himself to organize the best way he could as many people as he could possibly attract to this presentation. It was through literally our best friends in the whole world, Betty and Mario. Betty's standing at the door here, she's our bouncer. That it all became possible. And the reason this room is not filled is because you folks are the only ones that don't know about mind control. All your neighbors and everyone else does. And when they read the papers and they see where young people are blowing themselves up, what you can imagine is what would possess someone to lose their ability for self-preservation. And I ask people all the time in airports, restaurants, whenever the opportunity prevails, wonder what it is that these people are thinking about when they blow themselves up. My goodness, I'm really surprised at the answers. Because in 1990, when I presented this information to members of Congress that I personally knew, and again in 1995, when we presented our case before Congress, after being stopped in the open court when the judge declared that our case could not be further adjudicated because he was invoking the 1947 U.S. National Security Act, in which, by the way, each and every one of you is subject to, because Canada has a peace treaty with the United States. In any country that has a peace treaty with the United States, there is in that peace treaty our 1947 National Security Act. So if the CIA decides to come in and abuse you and torture you out of your mind like they did at the Allen Memorial Institute by the founder of the American Psychiatric Association, Dr. Ewan Cameron, there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing. The cases were finally settled against the CIA a couple of years ago after practically every one of the litigants had died. The litigants received $50,000 for their minds and their lives, and that money wouldn't even begin to pay for the class action lawsuit. For those of you who wonder where mind control came from, it's an ancient form of mental manipulation. Traumatic mind control, or trauma-based mind control, is as old as mankind's existence. They have found drawings in caves that are thousands of years old that depict the exact formula for torturing someone out of their mind and taking complete control of them for the rest of their lives. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's an accurate and 100% complete formula for the control of another person's mind. Of course, it's trauma-based. Heinrich Himmler was assigned by Adolf Hitler to research the families that were multi-generational, for all intents and purposes, Satanists, who had incestually abused their children, exposed those children to blood rituals, and those children had developed some extraordinary abilities. They had, well, we all have photographic memories. I don't have enough film. But had I been tortured, I would have. They had photographic memories. they had eye-hand coordination where they could point and shoot. So you can see how the implications for becoming a perfect soldier there. Of course, photographic memory would be an excellent spy. The surprising things that were happening that Heinrich Himmler had discovered, welcome folks, was that there seemed to be an opportunity to research mind control and dedicate the scientists that Hitler had at his disposal, the mind scientists. And he was not really concerned with producing an atom bomb, because Adolf Hitler believed, and rightly so, that if he could control the minds of his appointed politicians for his New World Order. And by the way, Caesar was the first one to use that term, New World Order. Then Adolf Hitler, then George Bush Sr., and every president that followed. So, those of you like Vern and myself, I'm sure many of you in the audience have used that term, New World Order. In the early 90s, people looked at you like you were some sort of conspirators. Then George Bush Sr. announces it on international television, and no longer were we considered conspirators. Or, I don't think I ever received an apology. I know Kathy didn't from anybody. And believe you me, we had many people tell us that's nonsense. But mind control was going to be the super weapon of the future in Hitler's belief. So after the war, Second World War, the United States in 1947 persuaded Harry Truman, which I still believe was one of the best presidents the United States ever had, persuaded Harry Truman that if we, meaning the U.S., didn't import these Nazi and fascist scientists who were supposedly rocket scientists to the U.S., then the Soviet Union would get them. So they got an act passed by Congress, and they promised Congress there would be no SS members, only Nazis. That was the first lie. Oh, and by the way, that same year, in 1947, the CIA was born. Ironically enough, the 1947 National Security Act. And every peace treaty with every country that the United States had was rewritten, so that every person in those countries would be subject to the U.S. National Security Act. So the U.S. could do anything they wanted to any member or any citizen of any country. And there was no way those people had any way to adjudicate it in a court of law. They had no way to protect themselves. And so, it has become a law that most people are not even aware of. In 1947, this project, Paperclip, was the super secret project that the CIA was responsible for. And it ran some 44 years. They moved the families and these scientists, some 900 scientists, supposedly all rocket scientists. 700 plus of these scientists were mind scientists, and they were placed in the U.S. universities, corporations in a holding pattern until they could figure out what they were going to do. So by 1952, a CIA operative, field operative, who was in South Korea, released a news item through UPI, United Press International, that included a term that no one had ever heard: brainwashing. They said the Chinese were using a technique called brainwashing, and that they could take a soldier and send him back to his troops or send him back to his country. And that soldier would have a complete and absolute utter disgust for his own country, and he would have 100% allegiance to the Koreans, in this case, North Koreans, and or the Chinese. And it became so well known and used that during the Vietnam War, we had soldiers that were captured. And there would be hundreds of U.S. and other countries' soldiers captured in these prisoner of war camps, horrible conditions. They would only have one or two soldiers, one or two North Vietnamese soldiers or Chinese soldiers, guarding hundreds of captured U.S. and other nations' soldiers. And no fences, by the way. No fences whatsoever. They didn't need them. So the CIA put it out into the press that mind control or brainwashing had become a way that our enemies were producing the perfect soldier, the perfect spy, and they could control anyone's mind. They didn't talk about politicians, of course. Mind control had come into reality in a mass way. It was becoming systemic. Cults, many religions, all governments, all militaries, and all espionage agencies were applying what the Heinrich Himmler studies had proven about that they could find children who had grown into adulthood, who had been sexually abused and psychologically abused and traumatized, particularly before their brain had even had a chance to form, before age 5. They could create anything they wanted with these people. So around 1953, the United States government began testing every child in every school, be it public or private. They had to be tested. Those test results went right back to the government. They were supposedly IQ tests, masking the true purpose, which was to determine which people would be the future recruits for the intelligence community, for politics, and of course, for other government jobs where robotic mind control would be effective. In 1968, I was trying to dodge the draft legally. And I had moved my draft board from state to state. I finally went to the state of Alabama because that was the last state to recruit on the draft. I had asked a friend of mine and a family friend, I should say, who was a doctor, to write me an excuse saying I had problems with alcohol. And I could prove it because my father was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic, committed suicide. They ran the family. The truth of the matter was, I didn't like alcohol. I was just trying to lay the draft. When I was called for the draft, and they gave me my physical, there was about 5,000 young men at Maxwell Air Force Base, southern part of Alabama. And I heard the name Margaret Phillips called out a couple of times, and then they said Margaret Ewing Phillips, and I knew it was me. And I had to stand up in front of 5,000 or so young men, and they were just about on the floor laughing. They mispronounced my name. And they directed me back to this room, and I remember there was an Air Force colonel there, and there was an Army major, if I remember correctly. I didn't know much about the military. I was later told that was their rank. And there were some men in suits there. And when I walked in, they said, "We understand that you don't want to serve your country in Vietnam." I said, "I don't think I'm capable." They said, "Well, we have another job for you. We have a special place for cowards." And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I've talked to 200 people out there that don't want to get in. Why am I the only one that's getting this treatment? But I kept my mouth shut. And these two gentlemen pulled me off to the side after this colonel said some very rude things to me I won't even repeat. He pulled me off to the side and he said, "Mark, we're going to use you, and you're going to be used in a very different way. You're not going to Vietnam. You're going to work for the intelligence community. Now you pack up and get on the bus and go back home," because I was actually living in Atlanta at that time. So I went back home. I was living in this lady's basement and working 2 jobs and going to college at night. And I was applying for every job I could that would possibly want me. I was getting nowhere because I had no experience, nothing. So I was directed by 2 different people to the same employment agency. And I went to this employment agency, and this employment agency said, "We'd like for you to go out and take an interview with the Ampex Corporation. You'll be an engineer." Well, unlike Vern, I'm dyslexic. I can't even imagine being an engineer. And my math skills are deplorable. I can barely balance our check-in. I said, "Well, I'm not qualified." They said, "No, you'll qualify. Just go out." So I met with the divisional sales manager who ran the office for Ampex. By the way, Ampex was a multi-industrial provider, or a corporation that provided a number of things. They invented the instant replay. They invented or reinvented magnetic tape and video and audio equipment, instrumentation equipment. And they had huge contracts with NASA and the military. I sat down after filling out the application, leaving practically half of it blank. And And this man was looking at me, and he was asking me questions that weren't really applicable to engineering. He said, I'll give you a call in a day or two. He said, and then we need to test you. You'll see our company psychologist first. And then if you make it through that testing, you're going to see our company psychiatrist. And if you make it through that testing, you're going to see a government psychologist and a government psychiatrist. This went on for almost 4 months. And there were over 200 other people that applied for that job that were highly qualified. And I seemed to be the only one. I was given the job. And they were actually paying me for taking my days off. They told me, they said, you know, what are you making, you know, on your 2 jobs? So I'm going to lose those 2 jobs. So they were actually paying me to go in and be tested day after day after day. As many as 4 days a week, just going through batteries of written tests. They had nothing to do with engineering. They had something to do with the way I thought. It appeared to me they were looking for something or someone who had the capacity to keep their mouth shut. After getting through the first two rounds, I got through the next rounds, and then the fellow that was the divisional manager called me in. He said, "You're hired." I went from earning about $4,500 a year to earning almost $18,000 a year, and I was given a brand new automobile, and I had nothing to do. And then one day, they called me, and my boss called me in, and he said, "You're going to be going to Washington. So you've got to undergo some training." So you won't be in Washington, you'll be in the state of Maryland, and you'll be in the state of Virginia. I went through exhaustive training. If any of you have seen the movie The Recruit, it'll give you some basic idea of what I went through. I was well prepared to become an active part of the intelligence community, working in espionage and counterintelligence. I was not glamorized my job. I was a bag man, literally, for taking file, films, and tapes from places like the Yerkes Primate Center in Atlanta. They have another one in Denver. From Sanford Research Institute, Berkeley campus. Mental institutions, both federal, state, and even county. And federal and state prisons. I worked only to ensure that the file, films, and tape, and the ones who were there, were not speaking of anything that they saw or anything that they did. What I saw was 100% benevolent. And one of the doctors that I later worked with at NASA, he pulled me off to the side. He said, "Mark," he said, "isn't this the most exciting thing you've ever seen?" I said, "Yes, it is." He said, "We're taking people with brain damage. We're taking incorrigible killers, rapists. We're turning these people into citizens who can actually be a contributing member of society. People that haven't lost their ability for emotional normalcy. They can love, they can cry, they can feel, but they do not have the problems that they had before they went into these programs. I did not see any torture. None. I didn't see any food deprivation, water deprivation. I didn't see any electroshock except for very mild stuff that, you could probably get going across your rug. I didn't see anything at all. And a lot of my work was associated with training apes, push buttons, in case we had a problem like the Soviet Union had with the rocket blowing up and losing astronauts. They were going to use apes. That's like training a 5-year-old to fly an F-16. I couldn't imagine it working, and none of the scientists really did. I mean, we had apes that could speak, they had an enormous dialect as far as using sign language. But as far as functioning in an environment where they had to do certain things upon command remotely, I doubted very seriously that would work. So I was being exposed to a lot of mind control research in a super secret project that I had only heard the name rumored. And that was MK Ultra. The MK Ultra program began in earnest in 1952. And we offer a disc out there. This goes from 1952 to 1987. You can't get it anymore. It's been reclassified. That's the silliest thing. Just looks like we're covered gently. They released this thing for a short time. The CIA did. There's 17,000 files, 35,000 pages, and it goes into a great number of the CIA's projects working with mind control. Now, for something that Kathy and I were not even allowed to use the word mind control, we'd say behavioral modification, mind manipulation, or brainwashing. But to even say the word mind control in court, we were prohibited. Or even before some of the physicians, because the physicians in the law enforcement groups were the first ones that invited us in to speak. And they actually we were working and teaching them to identify people who had been programmed. Drug runners, primarily. We were teaching border guards. Now, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, because here we are, whistleblowers, and we are training federal officers and some state to identify mind control victims. But the rest of this story, not to jump around, the rest of the story is that in the mid-80s, I decided I'd had enough. I'd learned too much, because in 1974, when I got tired of watching, I actually fainted, and that's what really started the whole thing. I could not deal with blood product, and I couldn't watch another brain surgery. I just couldn't deal with it. So I told him, I said, I got to do something else. I can't deal with this. I'm starting to have nightmares, and it's traumatizing. So they said, we have an opportunity for you. You can go to work for Laser Systems and Electronics. He said, this is a NASA spin-off company that's working with some highly classified behavioral modification research technologies. I was vice president in charge of sales. I worked for this company exactly 1 year for my contract, and then the company was solidly broken up. They were the first ones working with General Medical Corporation, and this has been declassified, so I can tell you. They were the first ones to develop a behavioral implant. It was a small telemetric device that would not only send, but it would receive messages, and it would stimulate various regions of the brain, whatever needed to be stimulated. And it was put in through a procedure called transphenoidal hyposectomy. It went into the nasal cavity, or went into the sinus cavity through the nasal passage. Relatively bloodless, and it was totally a disaster. Those things didn't work. The whole project folded up, and the government walked away from it. But the CIA, along about 1973, and again in 1977, and again in the mid-80s, they put out all this information. And they put it out in a way of conspiracy-type information about implants for controlling people's minds. And to this day, to this very day, I hear about these implants that people have in their brains that control them. There have been many movies that featured this. The fact is, they don't need implants to control someone's mind. They are far less intrusive, highly sophisticated means using microwave, directed lasers, and a whole host of other ways, including HARP. We're getting into all of this in our workshop to control the human mind. But you see, even as benevolent as I thought this research was, I wasn't seeing it coming to the private sector. One day, a NASA scientist who I befriended told me, he said, you know, it takes 25 years for anything that we're doing to reach the private sector. I said, why? He said, well, because this has military application. I said, he said, listen, by the year 2000, our prisons and our mental institutions will be virtually emptied. I've been assured of that. So I'm not supposed to tell you that, but I've been assured of that. Oh, wow. I was really a small part of a very important research project. And I felt proud inside. I felt pride, but I didn't like working in the medical field. I don't like surgery. I don't feel the doctors. No offense if any of you guys doctors in here. Just I don't like medical doctors. I avoid them at all costs because of their programming. So I said, listen, is there something else I can do a little more glamorous? And I had a job offer from Revlon that I thought, wow, this is too cool. I will work for Revlon. And I interviewed in New York, and they were ready to hire me. And all of a sudden, I get this offer that I can't refuse. My home originally was Nashville, Tennessee. I was living in Atlanta. And I got an offer to work for Capital International Airways. The company had been around a long time, formed in 1947. They were flying a lot of military Air Command MAC flights. They were the world's largest supplemental airline. They had, at that time, jumbo jets, big DC-8 stretches, 252 passengers, and they were flying charters all over the world. But they needed somebody with a high clearance. So I thought, I don't know why, unless because of something in the military. I didn't realize that later on there'd be a book published referencing me as a bad guy because I was working as a senior officer and vice president for Capital International Airways, who was a primary carrier for Project Paperclip. And it had been moving the families around of these Nazi and fascist scientists for 44 years. You see, I didn't know this. And what did I tell you? That I didn't know I had been working for the CIA. I thought I worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. That was who I was paid for. That's who I worked for. I had no clue. And I was told many times on the side, you work for the CIA. I said, no, I was trained on it, but I don't work for it. I work for the DIA. So I said, yes, I do. And so when I worked for Capital, one of the guys that had been there forever came up to me and he said, how does it feel to work for a company you can actually have the initials on your shirt? Finally. I said, what are you talking about? He said, we're CIA. I said, no, we're Capital International Airways. I was a slow learner, I suppose. But the president of the airlines, he sold airlines to some Iranians. How convenient. And the acting chief executive officer liked me, so he said, let's form an airline in Alaska. So we did. Great Northern Airlines. When I found out what Great Northern Airlines was doing, they put Wien Air Alaska out of business. And they were destroying, through a genocide program, the natives that were sitting on top of one of the largest oil reserves in the world. When I found this out, I decided I'd had enough. And I knew that I couldn't get away from it because it's kind of like the mafia. So I went business for myself, had an antique business. I made it to the point where I actually had a seat at Christie's. I decided that it was easier for me to make money selling a whole lot of stuff than it was one item, just hoping I was going to make a lot of money off of it for one item every 2 or 3 months. And my name was in the paper so much, though, when I was with Capital International Airways, that there was a fellow that contacted me. He was a country music entertainer. He was an MC, ventriloquist. There's actually a man in here that actually filmed him and filmed Kathy and filmed her daughter here in Canada. Quite a validation. This fellow contacted me and said, we need somebody that has your international expertise to go to Hong Kong and help form with a Korean businessman a joint venture with the People's Republic of China. We're going to manufacture large capacitor banks because the mining industry over there is overtaxed. They don't have enough energy. These capacitor banks would save a lot of energy and help their output and help the environment. So again, I thought, well, this is a really good opportunity. So I explained to this fellow, his name was Alex Houston. I said, I'll be happy to do this only if I am the president. He said, fine. I said, and you put up all the money. He said, fine. So I put the company together, the corporation. And I worked with a fellow by the name of William Yoon, who was an arms dealer. He owned a shipping line. He was actually Korean. He couldn't go back to Korea because that price went his head. but he worked with Chinese. And since the mining industry deals with metals, anything dealing with metal in a raw product, military controls. So I was working with Chinese military. The night of the ribbon cutting ceremony in the Shenzhen province for our factory, which was enormous, was going to initially employ somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people. I had already sold, pre-sold, enough production that was projected for the next 6 to 8 months. Sold it in the Philippines. I sold it. I had friends in Thailand, high-up friends. I had friends all over Southeast Asia that I cultivated in capital, international airways, and through other contacts. So the night of the ribbon cutting ceremony, I'm standing there with William Yoon. Alex Houston wasn't there. And I was standing there with all the brass and matter of fact, the mayor of the town and the governor, if you want to call him that, of the whole Shenzhen province were standing with me, and they were taking pictures. This fellow approaches with a small briefcase under his arm. And I watched my translator, I watched Mr. Yoon, and they just, like the seas parted. And this small fellow, Chinese man, in a suit, approached me, and in perfect English said, "May I have a word with you in private?" And I looked at Mr. Yoon, and he did a nod. We had some hand signals between us. He was telling me it was extremely important, and don't resist. Jeez. I stepped to the side. This guy opens a briefcase. This little leather thing. He said, I need to speak with you on a most urgent matter. I said, what is it that's so urgent? He said, your business partner. I said, you mean Mr. Yoon? No. He said, your business partner in the United States, Mr. Houston, is of great concern to us. And I'm going, whew. I thought he found out about my background. I thought, well, I was cooked goose right there. And he said, we know who you are. He says, as a matter of fact, you recognize any of these records? I recognized neighbors as I was a child that they had interviewed, the names. You know how when you're a little kid you remember the names of your neighbors? They had interviewed all my neighbors as a little child. They had interviewed all my school teachers. They had all those records, all those psychological testing things. They also had some stuff that was highly classified. And the original stamps and where people had signed it off was still on the papers. And I'm looking at this, and I'm seeing one of the greatest breaches of national security I have ever witnessed in my life. And I'm in total shock, but unable to say anything because Yoon had cued me to keep my mouth shut. And you must remember I was trained not to really show any kind of emotion or anything else. Not programmed, just trained. Then I saw something that I could not deal with. He began, I said, well, what is it about Mr. Houston? He said, Mr. Houston is in the drug business. I said, he doesn't even smoke cigarettes. I'm the guy that smokes cigarettes. He said, no, he's in the drug business for the CIA. He said, he's in the drug business. He's in the child and adult pornography business. As a matter of fact, he has a young woman and a small child under his control. Mind control. The words were never said under his control. They were his charges. He said he uses them as mules. And he said, and this goes all the way to your White House. In other words, it was sanctioned by members of the White House, the president, vice president. I'm absolutely overwhelmed with what he's telling me. And then it dawned on me that all I thought he wanted was my stock. In other words, this was a hostile takeover. Then his words came out of his mouth. He said, almost like he was reading my mind. He said, all we want is for you to go back and get rid of Houston, Mr. Houston. Well, naturally, I think of something else. And I said, we don't do that. I can't do that. He said, no. Get him out of this business. I know we don't care how you do it. I said, well, I wanted to buy him out. And he said, well, we'll provide the money and we'll divide his stock so you won't lose your control. I thought that was the most gracious offer I'd ever heard. I said, those files you have on Alex Houston. He said, yes, let me show you. And he showed me pictures of Alex Houston and such a small Haitian boy. I saw other things in there about how this woman in his charge was being used as a mule. The Chinese have outstanding intelligence. They've infiltrated the entire intelligence community within the United States, as far as I know. Because when I got back home, I picked up the phone and called someone I could contact within the U.S. Department of State. Not a friend, not anybody that I knew. It was the person in charge of reporting something of this nature, because this was a major national security issue. I explained what had happened. He asked me if I had spoken with anyone about this in the United States. I said, no. He said, well, say nothing. Don't say anything. We'll get back with you in a couple of days. He did. And you know what his answer was? Mr. Phillips, this is a matter of national security. You'll never speak of it again. It didn't happen. I bought Alex Houston out. And before that buyout, I invited he and his wife, and she came to the house. And I saw her. She was an absolute robot. Everything that I thought I knew, I knew. Everything that I thought I knew about mind control was being used in a hideous sort of way. More hideous than I could imagine. So I decided I contacted Mr. Yoon, and I said, Mr. Yoon, I'm going to get this woman and that child in psychiatric care. And I think I'll just fold up my office here in the States and come to Hong Kong and live. He said, that's fine. He said, but I don't think. He said, you've got a delegation of Chinese coming over there right now. He said, you're going to have to entertain them. And we'll talk about it when I get over there. In the meantime, I contacted some people I knew that were not nice people within CIA. And I asked them if they could provide me any information on the codes, keys, and triggers of what this woman, this Kathy O'Brien, that might trigger her out of existence. Because you see, when someone's under mind control, they believe that they are in the best possible case scenario. She had no idea, no concept. So she didn't know her name. She had no clue how old she was. And she had no idea where she'd been. Well, I was given the trigger. Well, she was hyper-religious. You know, it was praise the Lord every other word. And, you know, and there was no communication. You couldn't talk to her. I mean, well, total airhead. She dressed like a prostitute and talked like a minister. And the contradiction alone was enough to gag me. And, frankly, I didn't want to be seen with her. Or even near me, for that matter. All I wanted to do was get her into help. And then I saw something in her that looked like I had seen before. I saw something redeemable, in other words. That there was a real person in her somewhere. So I began looking around, trying to find a qualified psychiatrist to treat her and her daughter. And you know what I found out? This was in March 1988. And how I got her out, by the way, was a telephone call. I called her and told her this was God. And to read Psalms 37:37. And to meet that man. Oh, by the way, Psalms 37:37, for those of you who are not familiar with it, starts out, Mark, the perfect man. So she was to meet this man at a local Burger King, and she was to follow instructions because her life and her daughter's life depended on it. That was the code, key, and trigger. She was right there. And at that point in time, I had no earthly idea what I was going to do with him. So I took him to my home. And at that point in time, the sheriff contacted me and said, I understand from someone we know within the FBI, the CIA is going to kill you. The sheriff was a friend of mine. I said, Sheriff, the CIA doesn't tell you that they're going to kill you. I said, I bet you an FBI agent told you that because they're just pawns. I said, no, I'm not worried about it. He said, I'm worried about it. He said, I'm telling you this is very, very severe. He said, you've got to leave. I want you out on the counter. He said, this is going to be bad. I said, Mark, he said, whatever you've done, he said, it has something to do with that woman and that child. I said, Sheriff, if I told you about this woman and that child, and why, and he said, I don't want to know. He said, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't want it. I just want you to get out of this county. Well, I sold my home. And I found out there was no psychiatrist, no psychologist that knew anything about rehabilitation for someone that had been abused out of their minds. And I thought this was absolutely unbelievable because there wasn't. There was only studies being done in a few universities, one here in Canada, that studied what they call multiple personality disorder. There's no such thing as multiple personality. You only have one personality. That was the first chunk of nonsense that the psychiatric community had been fed. You have one core personality, and that personality can be fragmented. Matter of fact, it can be shattered. Kathy is known in the psychiatric center community as a polyfragmented MPD. Later, that was changed, and I think it was changed because of what we did. Because we were lecturing before mental health groups all over the United States and Canada. And they changed it to dissociative identity disorder, an applicable term. But the story of how we got where we were and how we went into the courts is all compiled in a book called Transformation of America, which is now, by the way, in 9 languages in over 50 countries. I've licensed foreign publishers, legitimate ones, virtually for free. They pay a one-time fee. And if it's a friendly country, when we license it in Arabic, I did not go to Lebanon to speak. It's the only country we didn't go to. The rest of them we've all gone and we've spoken. Now, the solution, oh, by the way, Transformation of America is a condensed version of our U.S. congressional testimony. It took 10 years and 5 years. How we managed to stay alive, how Kathy was recovered. And by the way, she is adjudged 100% recovered by the top psychiatrists all over the world. In other words, she did something that no one else has ever been able to do. Her recovery is due to two things. One of them was a lot of help that I got through the CIA. Just in phone calls, 2-3 minute phone calls, talking to people I didn't even know. I would ask them questions. If I didn't ask them the right questions, they would tell me the questions to ask, and then they'd give me the answers. I fell in love with her after she recovered, because that little spark that I saw early on, it was real. I found the person was not only intelligent, loving, kind, but she's unequivocally the best friend I've ever had, and the only person on the planet up until that time who cared to really know who I was, because I had lived a double life.
With these facts, mind control is an essential component of what's going on in our world today. Knowledge is our only defense against mind control, whether it's the kind of robotic mind control that I experienced under MK Ultra mind control on a White House Pentagon level, or whether it's cult mind control, which so many people suffer from in various religions or occult religions, where their minds are manipulated, where they no longer think for themselves. Or whether it's the kind of social engineering that is so predominant in our world today due to the high technology and propaganda and information suppression that's going on in our world. Since we all formulate our thoughts, opinions, and actions based on what we know, it's essential that you know that information is being manipulated against us all. Our knowledge base is being altered. And it's stopping people from taking the kind of action that's necessary for actually bringing about solutions to today's problems. This information control is not only coming on through our medias and through the technological advancements, but it's also in the school systems and affecting our children as well. So for our own sake and for the sake of our children, for the sake of the future, it's imperative that you understand exactly what mind control is. I'm not so much interested in talking about my past, or I don't live in the past, and I certainly don't have a victim kind of mentality where I want to whine and tell you all about what happened to me. But rather, it's my love for humanity and my concern for the future of our planet that compels me to speak out and tell you my experience and mind control so that it can give you a better understanding of exactly how it works, why it works, and how it's being used against us all to varying degrees. When I was just a young child growing up in Muskegon, Michigan, this was back in the late 50s, early 60s, mind control was already in full swing. Operation Paperclip had brought the Nazi and fascist scientists into the United States. Dr. Ewan Cameron was having his experiments at the Allen Memorial Institute, and the information on mind control was escalating beyond what had even happened in Nazi Germany at that time. when I was just growing up. I was born into a multi-generational incest-based family. My mother had been sexually abused, my father had been sexually abused, and therefore they were sexually abusing me. The Hitler-Himmler research had already determined that the multi-generational incest-based families, or any kind of abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, but in sexual abuse, as was my case, would create an autogenic response after 3 generations of abuse. When a parent would abuse a child, who would abuse their child, who would abuse their child, pretty soon it became an autogenic action where it wasn't even perceived as anything other than normal. And abuse was creating this dissociative identity disorder. When a person suffers from dissociative identity disorder, they're easily led and manipulated. When they're easily led and manipulated, they can be mind controlled more easily, as was what the Hitler-Himmler research had found out. The kind of mind control that went on in Nazi Germany was significant enough to manipulate the minds of the whole population, gain control of the children's mind, the Hitler's youth of that time, and also to create a kind of propaganda hold over the whole population. These studies had advanced tremendously by the time I was growing up. Even though the sexual abuse seemed so normal in my family because due to the multi-generational aspect that had been going on for so many generations, it still wasn't a natural thing. So I developed this dissociative identity disorder, which is defined professionally as the mind's sane defense to trauma too horrible to comprehend. There's no way a child can comprehend sexual abuse. They don't understand sex. They don't understand abuse. A child doesn't understand why a parent would be causing them physical harm. And even though that at that age, due to the multi-generational aspect, as far back as I can remember, there was a heightened sexuality, it didn't preclude the fact that I endured the pain and the suffocation of my father's sexual abuse, particularly while I was still an infant. This pain and trauma from my own family, who I should be able to turn to for help, was creating a compartmentalization of memory, where when my father would sexually abuse me, the part of my brain that had dealt with his abuse would actually open up to deal with it again. It was familiar with it. It knew how to deal with it. It knew how to handle it. When I would go to school and as a very young child, I didn't think of my father's sexual abuse because that had been compartmentalized into a small part of my brain so that the rest of my mind could function normally as though nothing had happened. Again, this is the mind's sane defense against the trauma that was too horrible to comprehend. I had no comprehension for it. So in school, I wouldn't think of that. I wouldn't think to bring that to mind. When abuse continued in other directions as well, such as the child pornography that my father was using me in, then I developed compartments in my brain to deal with the pornography that I was being subjected to. He was also sharing me sexually with relatives. I mean, after all, that was a, quote, normal thing among family members. And he was also prostituting me to certain friends of his. This was his way of supplementing the family income. My father had a 6th grade education and was earning his living as a worm digger. And so he was supplementing the family income with the proceeds from the child pornography and the prostitution. This created more compartments in my brain. There was a certain faction at that time of the U.S. government that was very much interested in targeting children like myself to raise in MK Ultra mind control. Since it had been determined that the abuse would create this high suggestibility, which was primed for mind control, when Operation Paperclip had occurred in the United States, this information was taken from the Nazi and fascist scientists, combined with information that the CIA had gleaned, and also the information that had been learned by the Catholics regarding trauma, the effects of trauma on the human mind through such things as the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition. They had already learned what would happen there. All this information was being compiled and put together in a very strong form of mind control, the MK Ultra mind control. So a local politician approached my father at that time and told him that he could receive immunity from prosecution for making and selling this child pornography of me if he would agree to sell me into MK Ultra mind control. My father thought it was a wonderful idea. Not only did he feel like that was a nice way out of any legal ramifications for his actions, but he also felt like the government condoned child abuse. After all, they were sanctioning it. After all, they were giving him immunity from prosecution. So he eagerly sold me into the project. And as quickly as he did, he was given instructions to go to Boston, Massachusetts, where he was given more instruction on how to raise me in the project, how to manipulate a highly suggestible young mind. He was just conditioning me for the kind of robotic mind control that I would experience later. This place where he was taken in Boston, Massachusetts also is the very same one that we've heard about in recent times regarding the Catholic child abuse. And I believe in the United States anyway, it was termed homosexuality as an emotional diversion away from the reality that was actually abuse of children for a very deliberate purpose of mind control. Now, I'm certainly not saying all Catholics are bad. I mean, that's absurd. There's no classification of or label for the people that are involved in this. It's just a handful of criminals that weave in and out of our society who are affecting a great many people with what they know and what we all should know about mind control. This criminal faction within the Catholic Church was very predominant in Muskegon, Michigan, where I was growing up. There was a huge church there that had a lot of the CIA connections for mind control purposes deliberately. There were occult rituals there that I was subjected to from that time on, which gave me more compartments within my brain. It also was, I endured abuse by priests, which was very devastating as well. Because as a very young child, that seemed so sacred, and now where was I going to turn? I couldn't turn to my parents for protection. I couldn't turn to people in my community, and now I couldn't even turn to my local church. It seemed like the whole world was involved in mind control. And it seemed especially strong to me because Muskegon, Michigan was some kind of a social engineering testing ground for mind control, not only from the Catholic end, but also because the government was sanctioning child abuse, to the extent where Muskegon, Michigan is now recognized by Muskegon itself, which they've put in their own newspapers as well, as being the pedophile capital of the United States. There are more pedophiles per capita in Muskegon, Michigan than other places in the United States. So to me it seemed like this was the way the world was. And even though that seemed like the way the world was, it was still devastating to me. for whatever reason, I didn't inherit that multi-generational acceptance of such abuse. It was horrific to me. It seemed to me there should be some place in the world where people didn't abuse each other, where people just loved each other and took care of each other. I had strong hopes of that until I began losing my ability to critically analyze and to think for myself through MKUltra mind control. I was exposed to very deliberate means to further dissociate me from any ability to think for myself. The kind of compartmentalization that I had in my brain had become so strong that I was operating on a subconscious level through these different compartments with no continuity of thought bridging between them. I had no conscious awareness. I had no ability to reason and to remember where I had even been just a few minutes before. There was no concept of time. There was no ability to connect any of the events that were happening when they would switch through those various compartments. By not having a conscious mind to critically analyze and think things through, my subconscious mind was left wide open to be manipulated and programmed by those who were deliberately perpetuating MKUltra mind control. My father was not a main controller. He was simply my handler. And as my handler back then, he was simply following directions where to take me for programming and the various abuses that I was exposed to. He'd been instructed to take me to Mackinac Island, Michigan, which is just right there between the U.S. and Canadian borders, where the Michigan governor's mansion was located. The governor at that time was George Romney, and he was very much interested in mind control. He wanted to take the information. He was particularly interested in the occult or the religious kind of mind control. And he was bringing it into the Mormon church, which was just gaining ground at that time and just really coming on strong. Because he believed that mind control on a stronger level than what the Catholics had learned, but all of the information combined along with technology would create a stronger form of mind control within the Mormon church. Ultimately, that it has increased tremendously, not only in the Mormon church and the Catholic church. There's numerous churches that are involved through various religions. But within the Mormon church, there are more recruits for U.S. intelligence than any other aspect. It's a prime conditioning ground for creating robotic compliance where there's no critical analysis, no questioning, no thought to what's going on, but only an ability to follow orders and do as told. The mind control that I was exposed to was rooted in the sexual abuse that I had, which meant that in later years I would be used to carry out sexual favors while delivering messages to and from various government leaders and for different criminal covert operations that I was used in, primarily during the Reagan-Bush administration. But at that time, I was still just a young child. My mind was being formed. And in Mackinac Island, Michigan, it was the first time that I met Pierre Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau was also actively involved in mind control. He and George Romney were sharing the information not only on the kind of cult mind control that went on in the church, since Trudeau is a professed Jesuit and Romney was a Mormon. They had a lot that they wanted to share in that area of mind manipulation, but they were also both very much interested in the education system. And I know from experience throughout my mind control victimization that Canada has been subjected to much manipulation through the school systems, as well as it has been in the United States. But George Romney was heavily involved in bringing in what was a precursor to the global education program that has dominated pretty much the globe entirely. It was in Mackinac Island, Michigan, where I also met who had become my owner in MK Ultra Mind Control, U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. Robert C. Byrd has been in U.S. Congress as long as I've been alive. He's the head of the Senate Appropriations Committee in the United States, which means he decides where money's going to be spent and how. And that money was being used to perpetuate this New World Order agenda, or the mind control of the population globally. He's very much interested in that particular agenda, and it's one that he was following and has for years and years. He's still in political office today. The local politician that had originally come out and granted my father immunity from prosecution continued further in his political career until he became the unelected president of the United States. That's Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was, as his political career escalated, so too did my victimization in MK Ultra Mind Control. It's interesting to note that in Gerald Ford's cabinet, he had Dick Cheney as his Secretary of State, Donald Rumsfeld as his Secretary of Defense, George Bush Sr. as the head of the CIA. We keep seeing the same handful of people over and over again who've been at this political top of this agenda for a long, long, long time. And it's time that people wake up and realize that they have no right to be manipulating us. They've only been manipulating us through the suppression of these pertinent facts on mind control that we all have a right to know. They've been manipulating us through the controlled medias that are corporately owned in order to perpetuate their oil interests, which ultimately is a significant destruction environmentally on our planet. It's inexcusable that we leave these people in power. In the United States, these people were not the least, it was my experience on the White House Pentagon level, that they are not the least bit concerned about elections, because elections are rigged. I really don't know of any place in the world where elections aren't being manipulated. In the United States, we have electronic voting, which is absolutely absurd. All I got to do is computerize the results. And when Bush Jr. was selected and put into office, it was even released 24 hours ahead of time that he had won the presidency through one of the major medias in the United States, because this was all already pre-planned. It's widely known now that by the people of the United States, they didn't elect him. The fact is, these people that are in control and who are manipulating the United States are manipulating the whole world and creating enormous catastrophes and keeping people fighting with each other constantly. And the wars and the horrors that are going on are creating a trauma base for us all. They know that when people see the kind of horrors and traumas that are going on in our world today, that they're more easily led. It's natural for the human brain to be more suggestible at a time like that, where the conscious mind just it's hard to even grasp it. So the subconscious mind is more vulnerable to manipulation. And it comes right on through the media at a time like that to tell us what to do, how to act. And it's happening on a global scale at this time. The truth that set me free from mind control can set us all free. Truth has a way of freeing us from fear. And once we get past the fear and realize that we're being manipulated through the media, as we begin to think further and realize what's actually going on in our world today. Not only on a political, global scale, but environmentally. Within our own societies, our own communities. Maybe even in our own churches. My experience in MK Ultra mind control was extreme, and the details are of the various operations that I was used in, including numerous operations associated with Canada, are in Transformation of America, as well as Access Denied. Transformation of America was the deprogramming of my victimization that was actually testimony to the U.S. Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence Oversight. It's all the details and the facts, just the harsh facts. Whereas Access Denied provides solutions and offers much healing information on how I recovered my mind and my memory of what had happened all those years in MK Ultra mind control. Because without conscious thought, I had no conscious awareness. Without conscious awareness, I had no memory of what was going on. I was totally amnesic of years and years and years of my life. I didn't know how old I was. I didn't know my own name at times. I didn't know where I'd been. And I certainly didn't have an ability to hope anymore that there was some place in the world where people didn't abuse each other. I had lost that when I was thrust into the project. One of my last free thoughts that I had prior to losing any ability to think for myself was that I would be a nun. And if I were a nun, then I wouldn't be abused. And I think that's very much how a lot of people end up going into that vocation, as hoping for an escape from abuse. But I had a profound experience at that time. I had a knowing that my spirit would always be in a safe, loving place while my body went through MK Ultra mind control. The tortures that I endured, the physical tortures, the psychological tortures, the sleep, food, and water deprivation, the high voltage stun guns, the horrors that I saw being perpetrated by those in control of our government, those all were very traumatic for my physical body, and yet my spirit could not be touched. There was no way to possess my spirit, affect my spirit, but there was also no way to express my own spirit. I didn't have the capacity for that, because without free thought, there's no free will, and without free will, there's no soul expression. I had no ability to stand for anything that I believed in. I didn't have any ability to have compassion. I didn't have the ability to protect my own daughter, who was ultimately born directly into MK Ultra mind control. For all the hopes that I had that there was a place where children wouldn't be abused, I couldn't even protect my own daughter. I couldn't protect myself. I'd lost my ability to think of survival means, and I certainly lost my ability to protect my own daughter, which it shows how far they can go within the human brain into that instinctual, the maternal instinctual area to even control that, where I couldn't protect her from abuse. They can go so far into the human brain, into the subconscious, that they can manipulate the deepest levels of subconscious that affect our breathing and our heart rate. So that if someone is used in military special forces, for example, they can take a bullet and not bleed and keep on going. The physical endurance with no concept of time is extensive. These were qualities that they were looking for in mind control. They show also how deep they can go into the human brain. What they know about the brain and how it can interact within our own bodies is something we all have a right to know. If it can be manipulated that much from the outside through trauma, imagine what we can do when we know what we're capable of with our own strength of spirit. For all of their plans, for all that they did in MK Ultra mind control, they never once considered the strength of the human spirit. It never occurred to them how important that is in all of us. It's that strength of the human spirit that allows for all of us to stand for those things that we believe in and stand against what is being perpetrated on our planet. That strength of the human spirit is what allows all of us to be able to think further than what we're being told. We just simply need to realize it. The strength of the human spirit is ultimately what allowed me to heal. Once Mark came along in my life and rescued my daughter and I directly out of MK Ultra mind control in 1988. I couldn't think to escape any more than I could think to protect my daughter, or think to survive, or think to stop the horrors that were happening. It took someone like Mark, who had eyes to see, ears to hear, and soul to know what was going on. Somehow he could see so deep inside of me that he saw that little spark of the strength of spirit that I couldn't even express. I had no ability to even express. And yet, he saw it and he knew it. Once Mark rescued my daughter, Kelly, and I, he took us to the safety and serenity of Alaska, where I began remembering all the things that I'd been programmed to forget. I couldn't think to trust Mark, but I had these heightened senses. Because when a person can't think, they develop other senses, as though I'd been blasted into other parts of my brain. It's kind of like how when a blind person has heightened hearing, or there's other senses that come into play to compensate for what we lack. Since I couldn't think, I had a bunch of senses that came into play that had been heightened. And I saw how animals trusted Mark. The animals had an ability to sense and to know in the same way I had an ability to sense and to know. And I thought that maybe I'd died and gone to heaven. I thought maybe he was an alien. It wasn't anything that I'd ever experienced before in life. It was the kind of caring and gentleness and love and compassion that he exhibited. The very fact that animals trusted him was astounding to me, because the people I knew abused animals. Oftentimes people who abuse other people abuse animals, like they have no regard for life at all. So seeing the animals trusted Mark was one of the very first sparks of being able to trust that was in me. It went into that other realm where that was beyond thought, and into a level that was akin to my spirit that had been untouched. The methods that Mark taught me for freeing my mind from the controls of MK Ultra abusers is detailed in Access Denied. I'm really excited about having that information out because I very much believe in voicing no negatives without a solution. And Access Denied provides solutions as well as the pertinent facts on mind control that will ultimately give us all the ability to be able to think further and free ourselves from the kind of fear that's going on in society today through the medias. Access Denied has just been out for a short time, and yet is setting other people free all over the world. Mark and I have been speaking, we've been around the world several times, and speaking in places such as Germany, where they're acutely aware of what mind control is. They're seeing what's being done to the rest of the world because they've already had their experience with it, they know what it is, and they recognize what's happening in the United States. They know that the people of the United States are not thinking for themselves. And what had happened to them in Nazi Germany had been advanced even further through the technological and media advancements that were taking hold in the United States. Additionally, there was great concern voiced in Italy, where they too had experienced much mind manipulation through the Catholic influence there. And they've since gained enormous insight into the reality of how that manipulation works, and therefore they're very much protective of their children, and they have their eyes wide open as to what's actually going on in the world today. As Mark and I traveled around the world, it was really easy to see that the people that we were reaching were like you all, and they were people within the various governments. They were people on levels of intelligence, people who were exposed to mind control in their own circumstances, like through the military special forces. And the information in Access Denied that details my healing process is one that they can apply to themselves regardless of the language they speak, because the healing comes from within. It's not from outside input and someone telling them what's happened to them, but it comes from within. Mark had taught me how to write out my memory. And now people are writing out their memory and healing all over the world, and we hear from them constantly. And they'll ask just a pertinent question to their own circumstance in order that they can be totally free and heal as well. But I feel so fortunate to have survived my ordeal and to have been able to deprogram and remember all those things that I was supposed to forget. In writing out my memory, I would actually take what was emotionally incomprehensible in those compartments, and by moving a pen, it would shift it into the logic part of the brain. And what was emotionally incomprehensible became logically comprehensible. I understood what happened. I understood where I had been. And the memories felt as though, of course I knew it all along. It all seemed so close, and that had been photographically recorded. So I wrote out my memories, which again are in Transformation of America, and the methods detailed in Access Denied. But once I regained my free thought, I had free will again. And when I had free will, I had soul expression again. And I had that strength of spirit. And I knew love. Love is the greatest healer in the universe. And I feel so fortunate to have experienced it. Since my spirit had never been touched, my spirit is that very essence of my being. And once I had remembered where I had been, I had to learn to think for myself. It was the usual questions of, who am I, and I found my own identity, not based on ego, not based on what somebody else was telling me I should be, not based on my past experiences that were not any expression of myself, but rather I found my own identity, true to soul, and that strength of spirit, and that little spark. I've been told, well, you need to love yourself. And there was no amount of daily affirmations I could possibly give to myself after where I had been that could give me a concept of loving myself, per se. And I found this by simply living the love that I am, the love energy, that strength of spirit, simply by living that, pure, without society's influences, gave me an ability not to just love myself, but to give love and to act in love. And it's not any kind of vengeance that compels me to speak out, but rather this love. And it was love for my daughter that was one of the first forms of expression of that love that I had. Because Mark and I were literally dodging bullets when he rescued she and I. And the horrors that she went through in her own recovery process that's detailed in Access tonight had thrust me into a position of speaking out and seeing to her safety as best I could under the circumstances. And our court case that should have freed her was stopped under that 1947 National Security Act. The National Security Act prevented us from obtaining any kind of conventional justice at all. But Kelly believes, as I believe, that the ultimate justice is positive change through public awareness. And although she's not in a position to speak out herself, she knows that Mark and I are speaking out. And she finds great peace and satisfaction in knowing that people are waking up. And she's seeing it in all walks of her life, where the information is reaching people and people are becoming aware of the manipulation through fear in the medias, and how people are being manipulated through harmonics, in music or in art, and in other ways. Kelly's experience in mind control was vastly different than mine because hers was technological, whereas mine was trauma-based. Nevertheless, Kelly was blasted into those other parts of her brain the same way that I was. Now Kelly is in a position where she cannot think to do anything that's not emanating from her strength of spirit. She can't think to hold a 9-to-5 job, but she can do anything that she feels in her heart and in her spirit to be able to do. One of those things that she's doing right now is she's working on a horse rescue ranch where they're rescuing horses that have been abused or neglected through people, and she's helping to rehabilitate them because she has that telepathic horse whisperer kind of rapport with horses that has allowed her to communicate with them on a more telepathic, sensory level. And she's having wonderful success in that way, and as these horses become healed from what they went through, that to her is very rewarding and healing too. Because ultimately out of what she and I experienced, healing for us all is an ultimate joy. The kind of thinking that I have now, the freedom of thought, is something that I cherish. And it's something that everyone should experience and enjoy to the fullest, rather than be following the media's that are telling them what to fear and what to do. It's also the kind of free thinking that allows folks like you to come to a place like this and learn more and expand your own knowledge base rather than cave it into what so much of society has been told, that those of us who think free, who do want to learn more and aren't fitting into the mainstream social engineering aspect of society, are conspiratists and just all kinds of terms they like to put on us to make us feel like we're not normal. Of course we're not normal. We're way better than that. We have the ability to think free and to think for ourselves. Please congratulate.
Thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight, and we hope to see as many of you as possible that can come to the workshop, because it's going to be interactive. And in that workshop, you're going to go home with some details that are really heretofore unimaginable. The details that you're going to learn are things about what's going on around you. And once you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you can have a profound impact on those of you. Everybody knows 165 people in their life. And if you infect as many as 3 people in your circle of friends and loved ones with this information, from a position of comparative analysis, in other words, they can see this, they can see that within their own, even the news, they'll quickly understand what we're talking about is the worst scourge upon mankind, and that's mind control. We want each and every one of you to have the same level of knowledge that Kathy and I do. We, of course, are accustomed to teaching psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers and police and border guards. But we also have found that working with them, it's a very rigid type of thing, whereas working with the general population, particularly in foreign countries, in workshop, it has been the greatest reward that Kathy and I have ever had, because we get to interact with everybody, and practically everyone in the workshop has a positive contribution just through their questions. I had a young man ask me a question outside just a moment ago, which is extraordinarily important, that I hope somebody asked in this workshop. So the workshop is Sunday, and it's at 10 a.m. We'll go to 3 or later, but we have to limit it to 50 people, and we are going to speak again tomorrow night. So those of you that can attend the workshop, we strongly urge you to do so. And again, we deeply appreciate each and every one of you coming out, and we appreciate those of you who did the best you could to encourage others to come out. We thank you from the bottoms of our heart. Good night.